So I'm going to officially say good morning. Thank you all for being here. Today we are going to be painting um, mini seascapes. So I have a couple of examples here I'm going to share with you. We're going to be doing one like this with focusing on clouds and water, and then one like this. Now you could do both the same if you wanted, or you can do one of each example. And these are painted on Strathmore watercolor postcards. Now in the supplies list, I mentioned these, or that you could use a 5x7 size. That would work too. I'm going to be doing one on this new watercolor block that I got. I haven't tried it yet. So a block is, it's like a watercolor pad that's glued all the way around the edge. They leave one little space open where you can fit like a palette knife or the edge of your brush in there to pull that paper off of the block when you're done. And the advantage to this is that you don't have to stretch your paper. Now, I don't normally stretch my paper, and I don't know if I am going to use this today. Now that I said that, I just noticed this is hot press, so that's probably not going to work. I'll probably stick to the watercolor postcards. These are 140-pound cold press, so this is going to work a little bit better for a seascape type thing because we want a little bit of texture. So the hot press paper is very smooth, and the cold press has a little bit of texture, and we want that to sort of come through. We're going to be using a dry brush technique here, and we want some of the white of the paper to come through. So now that I've talked through that, I'm going to stick with these watercolor postcards. And normally, I don't stretch these, so that's when we tape them down on all sides to keep the paper from buckling. I just paint directly on here without doing that, and I don't usually have any problem. It's a pretty small piece of paper, and it, you can always sort of flatten it out by putting it under a heavy book later. And a lot of times what I do is I take these out, if I go on vacation, I have my watercolor postcards, I have my little travel watercolor kit, and I have a little bag they fit into. So I just paint directly onto the postcard while it's still attached to the pad while I'm out there sitting on the beach. So I am going to switch my camera here so you can see my workspace. And I'm going to go over the supplies. So I'm just using a number 6 brush today. You could use, and we kind of talked about that already, so I've got this Simply Simmons number 6 round. You could also use a number 8. That would be fine too. I've got this one that's kind of a smaller 8. So either one of those will work. And I've got a number 2 pencil. We're not going to be doing any drawing really except for just drawing in our horizon line, so we have a point of reference here. I've got my watercolor paints, so our basic colors: cool red, burnt sienna, your cadmium yellow. This is an azo yellow in the Van Gogh line. Sap green or hooker's green, ultramarine blue. I also have a cerulean blue and Payne's gray, which if you have would be helpful for these paintings. And we're going to mix some blue greens also for our seascapes. I've got a couple pieces of scratch paper if you have just some extra scratch watercolor paper to test your colors on. That's helpful, but not necessary if you don't want to. I've got a ruler. This is just to help us draw in that nice straight horizon line. Got my spray bottle. And I've got some paper towels under my palette. I also have a roll of paper towels on the side and my water container up here. Now, if you wanted to draw in your horizon line with a watercolor pencil, you know, your regular pencil really isn't going to show, but you could optionally use a watercolor pencil to draw in that horizon line. Any questions about the supplies? Okay, good. Looks like we're good to go. So I think we'll have time for 2 paintings. I've got one with just the water, the ocean, some clouds, and a little sailboat, which is optional. And then I've got one here where we have kind of our little beach with some grass. So I think we should have time for 2 of those. Now, I do have some photos. So in the past, when I've done this class, we've used just some like inspiration photos to look at sort of what the colors are in the ocean. Some of you know I was just in Hawaii, so I had an opportunity to take some pictures. So I'm going to see if I can share my screen here. So I'm just going to flip through a couple of these, and what I want to do is just point out some of the things that, you know, if you're sitting on the beach and you're looking at the ocean and the sky, you think, or if you're sitting down to paint a seascape, you think, well, everything's blue. If you actually are sitting, and this photo doesn't do it justice, but if you're sitting there, you'll notice the sky is a completely different color blue than the ocean. You've got like this nice cerulean, and it kind of fades up to this really dark color. And then in the ocean, you have this really, really dark horizon line. And then you've got bands of like these turquoise and greenish colors. And you've got the white. And of course, with watercolor, in order to get that white, we need to leave the white of the paper showing. Same thing with the clouds. So just some things to think about, and also think about what you want your sky and your clouds to look like, whether you want just a couple little clouds or a lot of clouds, a lot of waves with the white showing. I was trying to take some with the sailboats in there for the class, but here we've got really like some blue greens, and then the sky is a completely different color. There's more clouds. So you have some options here about what you want your painting to look like. This one kind of has a lighter sky with more clouds, and if you notice here, the clouds have these sort of purplish shadows. So it's not just blue and white. We've got a lot of different colors mixed in here. This one's kind of similar too. So anyway, just some inspiration. We're going to be trying to do an ocean that has some of these white waves showing. You could do just a plain blue sky if you're not confident with the clouds. This would be a little bit more complicated. You could probably do this with some salt to make these kind of clouds. And then this one is kind of like the scene with the beach that we're going to be doing. So just some inspiration, thinking about colors. I'm going to switch back here. And now that we're all inspired, we can start painting. So I am going to grab one of my watercolor postcards here. And we're going to start with this one. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to draw in a horizon line. And I've got this one, I don't know, a third of the way up from the bottom. For those of you who like to measure, it's about 1.5 inches. Now, if I'm sitting out on the beach, I'll just take another, watercolor postcard and sort of estimate where I want it to be and use that for my straight edge. But you can just use your ruler or whatever you would like to make that straight edge. So this sort of gives us point of reference. And with this one, since there's not any drawing involved, we're just going to dig right into painting, which is kind of nice. Been doing a lot of drawing in the recent classes. So I'm going to spray my paints down, give them a little squirt, and in this painting I've got some cerulean blue. I'm going to be doing a wet and wet up here to kind of establish our sky and our clouds. I've got some cerulean blue. I've got, it looks like a little bit of purple, so we could mix a little bit of purple. I've got some Payne's gray here. And then down here I've got more, some ultramarine blue, some Payne's gray, and a little bit maybe a blue-green here. So that kind of turquoise that we saw in the photos. So you can see like the sky is a little bit more of a cool color, and this is a little bit more, got some more warm colors going on down here. So I'm just going to mix some of those colors in my mixing area. So I'm going to take some ultramarine blue here. I'm just going to add a little bit of my cool red. That's probably a little more red than I wanted. So you just kind of have to mix until you get the right shade. Now I'm going to test this on my test paper here. So we're going to mix some purple and some sort of blue-green, so we kind of have those ready when we want to use them. So I think that's a pretty good color. So I'm going to do the same thing in another mixing area, and I'm going to bring in some ultramarine blue and then some of my sap green. I'm going to add a little bit more towards, that's kind of a gray color. If you have cerulean blue, you could bring that into your mixing area and add a little bit of green to that too. That's kind of a nice color. So we're just mixing some different colors. You don't have to use these in your painting. If you just like to use the colors that you have in your palette, that's totally fine. Okay, so we've got, I mixed some ultramarine blue and some of the cool red. So if you have permanent carmine or alizarin crimson, just a tiny little bit of that to get some purple in case you want to use that in your sky. And then I've got some ultramarine blue and the sap green, which kind of gives you a nice gray green. And then I mixed some cerulean blue with some sap green to get this turquoise color. So that's this one. And this is just straight up Payne's gray. Okay, so does everyone have their colors mixed? Ready to move on? Okay, so we're going to move on here. So we are going to, for our sky, we're going to do a wet and wet. And for our ocean, we're going to do a wet on dry. So the wet and wet is going to help us form these clouds. And we're going to kind of go back and forth between the two. And the wet on dry is going to help us get this nice texture and white space left on our paper. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to take our brush, and it's probably easier if you turn your paper a little bit. We're just going to paint the water out of your water container. I hesitate to say clear water because it's not clear water anymore. But just the water out of your water container on the whole sky here. We want the whole sky covered. So I know you can't see the water on my paper, but you want it to sort of be, there you can see that, kind of glistening. I got the light from, there you go. Sort of, see it, it's glistening, but it's not puddled up. So nothing's like dripping off of my paper when I lift it up. But I can see that I've got water covering the whole sky. And I'm just going right up to that horizon line without touching it. If you touch it, it's fine. And then we're going to just start working on our sky here. So you can see I've got a lot of white showing here. So those are areas where there isn't any paint. It's just the white paper showing through. So we're going to add the sky colors a little bit at a time, and then we're going to sort of go to our ocean. We're going to come back up here, and we're going to add a little bit more definition to our clouds. So the first step is, I'm just checking to make sure my paper's still wet, is to just start forming that sky. So all I'm going to do is take some of my cerulean blue. You might want to, I've got to get another mixing area here. You might want to just bring that out into a mixing area and add a little bit of water. Now if you don't have cerulean, you can use ultramarine blue also. So I'm just adding a little bit of water. And then make sure my sky is still wet, which it is. And what I like to do, I'm going to drop this color in here. I like to start from the top and the edges and sort of work my way in. Now I don't want to get more paint than I want. So I'm just going to sort of add some paint kind of where I know I want the clouds to be. So we want to leave quite a bit of white space here. And our sky should be darker at the top. So if you look at, and that I forgot to mention that when we were looking at the inspiration photos, your sky is going to be darker at the top and lighter as it gets to the horizon. And then the ocean is sort of the opposite of that. The horizon is going to be the darkest point, and it's going to get lighter as it comes toward you. So right now I think this is this is a pretty good start for me. So I can see I've got the sky sort of peeking through. We don't need a whole lot of color up there right now. We just sort of need some sky and some white space for our clouds. And then as that dries, we're going to go back in up there, and I have some puddling, so I'm just blotting that up. As this dries, after we add some of our ocean, we're going to come back up here and we're going to use a wet on. The key with this is to make sure that the whole area is wet. So if the whole area is wet, so let me demonstrate on here. So I got this whole wet area. Now if I drop, I don't have to hold my brush really any certain way. It's completely wet, so anywhere I add the paint, it's going to give you that softness. Now once it starts to dry, then you start to see individual brush strokes and sort of scratchiness. So that is sort of the key with this first part of the sky, is to make sure that that whole area is not like puddled wet, but like that nice glistening. So I don't know if you can see that in the video, but it's that nice glistening wet where you can see the light reflecting off of it, but there's no water like dripping. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to let that rest a little bit up there, and we're going to start in on our ocean. So we're going to start from the horizon line, and we're going to work our way sort of down. And what I like to do is sort of establish a horizon line and then use my brush and sort of use the side of my brush and the texture of the paper and add color from the sides towards the middle. So it'll make more sense when I actually do it. Ultramarine blue is a good color to start with here. So I'm going to just bring a little bit of that out into my mixing area. And we don't need to start with anything too dark because we're really going to be doing some glazing here with our colors. So all we're going to do is get a little paint on our brush, and we're going for sort of a drier brush than what we were doing up here, of course. So the drier brush will give us some of that texture in the paper, but we do want to establish our horizon line first. So I'm just going to hold my brush so it's kind of parallel to the paper, and I'm pointing the tip of my brush towards the horizon line. And I'm just going to start from one side, and I'm just going to pull my brush across the paper. You can see this isn't any sort of like perfect line, and that is what I want. I don't want a perfect line. I kind of want a an uneven sort of line or wash, and I'm going to do the same thing starting from the other side. So I kind of like to start from the sides and work my way in. So I'm pointing my brush towards that horizon line, trying to make that as straight as possible. And you can see I've got a really nice uneven line, so I didn't do anything fancy other than just pull my brush with that paint. And I like to pull my whole arm across and go from one side to the other. So right now I've got some really nice white uneven edge there, which could be, you know, how I form some waves and some of this nice white space here. And we can add some blues and greens and some of these colors that we mixed here as we go. I'm going to just start with my ultramarine blue here. I'm going to add a few more brush strokes. So again, I'm starting from the left and moving towards the center, and I'm sort of holding my brush like really like parallel to the paper. And I've got kind of a drier brush. I'm just moving my brush along like this. And you can see I'm not covering all of the paper here. Definitely like some white. It's got that scratchiness that Sinden was talking about, which is what we want. Something we don't normally want, but for this we do want it. And I'm going to do the same thing from this side. And you can see I'm not trying to match up to that first line I painted against the horizon. I'm not trying to overlap to that because I want some of that white space to show through. And I'm just going to do a couple more of these. Ultramarine blue is what I'm using. And we're going to come back and we're going to add some of our other colors. So this is just going to be the base. And I'm going to do one more here. And I'm just going to leave some nice, so you can see my brush is very dry and it's just skipping along the paper and leaving that nice texture. So I'm going to hold this up a little bit closer so you can kind of see that. And you can already see, like, it really doesn't take much to create a seascape. You've got your sky and your ocean, as long as you leave some nice white spaces. Really a couple more colors glazed over the top is going to make this. The sky could even be complete at this point if you wanted to. So, and see, mine's already kind of drying. I'm just going to add a little bit, another color. I think I'm going to use some of this turquoise that I mixed here. Put this back so you guys can see it. And I'm just going to start. I'm going to start from my horizon line. I'm going to kind of do the same process. Now, I'm going to be mindful of the nice white space that I have left here and try not to cover up too much of that. But I'm going to just go along my horizon line with this nice turquoise color. The sap green. And then I will send like a picture of that, of the swatches with the colors we mixed to get them. I'll send that with the instructions. So you'll have that for later. So I'm just going to continue down a little ways. I'm just going to do a couple more brush strokes. Again, I'm trying to sort of avoid covering up all my nice white waves that are showing through. Get a little bit more of this, and I just come in from each side and work towards the middle. So again, it's kind of a drier brush. which lets me use the texture of the paper to my advantage. So we'll take another minute on that. Now we're going to come back down here and do a little bit more, so don't be worried if you don't feel like that's where it needs to be. We're going to come back and we're going to add, I have got some Payne's Gray here, and we're going to kind of use that to sort of define these waves a little bit. We're going to pick out some areas. We're going to go back up to our sky for a minute first. How's everybody doing with that? Okay. So we're going to go back up to the sky for a bit. And I'm going to use some of, maybe a little bit of this purple and mostly cerulean. I'm going to start with the cerulean blue. And I've got kind of a watery mix here. I'm just going to test this over here. I might want a little bit more paint in that. And so at this point, we're just going to be picking out where we want to define our clouds a little bit. Now you can just follow along with what I do, or you can you know, pick out the clouds based on how your painting is sort of shaping itself. I kind of let, you know, the painting do that. So I see, you know, I've got some clouds here, and here I can define the top edge of those clouds a little bit more. I can define sort of this sky that's right in between here a little bit more. So I'm going to turn my paper a little bit so that I can reach my sky. And I'm just going to start defining the top edges of those clouds. So I'm going to start at the top and sort of work my way around. So what I'm doing is I've got some of the cerulean blue on my brush, and I'm just sort of using the side of my brush and adding some more cerulean blue here to sort of define some top edges of those clouds. I'm just going to sort of work my way across here. And like I said, if you already like the way your sky looks and you want it to be more sort of soft rather than defined clouds, you could do that. I'm going to do that sort of right here in the middle. Just going to sort of define the sky and the clouds. So I'm just sort of using the side of my brush and sort of wiggling it around in here. And you can just sort of make it up as you go, really. And if you find that you've got an edge that you don't like, it's too hard, you can wash your brush, blot it off, and just sort of soften that edge a little bit like this, sort of with the side of your brush. I'm just going to sort of work my way back around, adding a little bit more dark color at the top. And then I might introduce a little bit of that purple. You can just add that right into that cerulean and add a little bit towards the top there. Like I said, if you find you've got some hard lines there, you can just soften them a little bit with after you wash your brush and blot it a little bit. And you could go right in like with the purple like this, and oh no, you're fine. Yeah. Mm. Yeah, that's a very strong color. So I'm just going in here and I add a little bit more purple here. Now I've got some very, very white clouds here. So what I'm going to do is, in this one I add a little bit of Payne's gray towards the horizon. And when I say a little bit, I mean really a little bit. So yeah, this Payne's gray, so here I've mixed a little bit of Payne's gray with a lot of water, and I'm just going to test this on my test paper first. We want it to be really light. So I think that's pretty good. I'm going to come over here towards the horizon line, and I'm just going to add, and I'm using sort of the side of my brush, I'm just sort of squishing that paint around with the side of my brush. And I'm just adding a little bit of that darkness down there. Maybe a little bit up here. So every cloud painting is going to be different, just based on really what your painting wants to do, is what I found. Now you could also add a tiny bit of that purple in there. Just going to add a little bit of that purple down there. And I think with the sky, it's kind of like an iterative process where, you know, you kind of add a few layers and then take a look at it, see if it's what you want. If not, you can come back in here and define some more edges a little bit. Break up the clouds a little bit by adding a little bit more of your sky color. If I see there's like too much of a blob of clouds, all you have to do is add a little bit more of that cerulean blue and sort of break it up a little bit. Or if it's not the shape that you want it to be, like I can just change the shape of this cloud right here by adding some of that sky color. And again, if you get it too hard of a line, you can just soften it off by washing your brush and blotting it go in there and just soften it a little bit. I'm going to add just a little bit of blue over here to break this cloud up, I think. Just soften sort of the top of that so it blends in with that cloud. You probably all think that I talk to myself like this when I'm in my studio or on the beach painting, but I really don't, I promise. Right? Yeah, so it's all good. So I'm going to let that rest. Come back to it and finish that. And let's go down to our ocean again and add a little bit more darkness. So at this point we can add any of these other colors that we mixed. I've got this nice gray green here. And we want, again, our sort of darker colors to be closer to the horizon. Oh, that's nice. So I'm using the gray green that was sort of the ultramarine blue and the sap green. And I'm just going to add a couple brush strokes here. Oh yeah, if the horizon line of your sky is still wet, maybe avoid that. One thing you can do is if you got too close, take your paper towel and fold it in half, and then you can press down right along that line and blot it up. And then you can wait till it dries and you can sort of fix it. All right, I'm going to add some Payne's Gray now to sort of darken that horizon line. A little bit darker Payne's Gray. I don't want it to be too dark. But I'm going to use the same technique now as I did at the beginning. I'm just sort of using the side of my brush and I'm pushing down and I'm pointing the tip of my brush towards the horizon line. And I'm letting the brush sort of skip over. We're just adding a little more definition now with this Payne's Gray right at the horizon. I'm working my way in from the sides here. I'm just using the rest of the paint that's on this brush. We could pull this down a little further if we wanted. I don't want to make it too dark. And then what we can start to do with either your Payne's Gray or one of your blues that you've mixed is take a little bit of that and sort of notice where you want some waves to be a little bit more defined. So I'm going to choose like right this area right here. I've got this nice white space. So I'm just taking a little bit more Payne's Gray and I'm just going to sort of define that, the top of that wave just a little bit. Now you could also do that with your any of your other colors. You could do that with the ultramarine blue also. That's what I kind of do, is I sort of define the top of it. So you can kind of like look as you go down, where are some areas that could be defined just a little bit more. Some white spaces. I see a couple here that I just want to. And then it's going to add a little bit more of that blue. This is a very colorful ocean I've created here. Yeah. I'm adding a little bit more of the ultramarine blue so I don't get the ocean too gray. But like I said, you could use your turquoise or your gray green. And anywhere that you feel needs a little bit more definition, I might just get this horizon line just a little bit darker here. And right now I'm just sort of using the tip of my brush right along that horizon line with some Payne's gray. I made it just a little bit darker right at the horizon there. Clouds take a little bit of practice for sure. Oh, like the painting the sky is like the negative space. Yeah. Well, for you, a wet and wet sky might be the ticket, you know? And we could actually do that in the second painting. We can do just a wet and wet sky, and then whoever wants to define their clouds more can do that. But that's definitely another way to do this if you don't want to sit here and, you know, try to figure out the negative space. It definitely is. Yeah. Oh, clouds. Yeah, I practice a lot with clouds, for sure. And waves. The trick with the waves, I think, for this kind of, I mean, this isn't a really super defined painting. It's pretty. I mean, it's kind of bordering on abstract. But the trick is just to let the paper kind of show through and do that glazing. Now I'm adding just a little bit more purple. I'm probably on the edge of overdoing this painting right now. I think I should stop. So the last thing I'm going to do, if you want, is you can draw in a little sailboat. Now, if you have a pen, you could do it with your pen. If you have a small paintbrush, you could do that. I'm just drawing in like two little curved lines here. And then like a thicker line right above the horizon. So my sailboat is very simple. And I'll use a small brush if you have one. You could use this and some Payne's Gray. I just, I used my pencil. So you could do this, you know, freehand with your paintbrush if you wanted. But it's kind of like a triangle with curved lines. So it's just really two curved lines kind of in a triangle shape. And then just a thicker line right for the base of the boat, right at the horizon. I'll hold it up just a little bit more. Can you see that? I know it's not totally focused, but yeah, I kept it kind of simple. And then I'm just going to paint over it with my small brush. It kind of does. So it could either be a sailboat or a shark. Your choice. Yours is just a bigger boat. Now, honestly, I would sit here probably for a little while longer or come back to this and go, oh, where do I want to add some more to the sky or some more definition? So when I do these, I kind of come back to them, and it's sort of an iterative process. So just keep that in mind. You don't have to like finish something in one sitting, you know. Start it, let it dry, take a look at it, think about it, or not. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Of course. Well, for me, I like the white at the bottom. For me, it's like I don't want any more, but you could definitely do something like we're going to do in this next painting where we do add some beach in the front. So maybe that will answer your question when we finish that painting. Hmm. Well, you could just, yeah, add a few more brush strokes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're going to move on. In the interest of time here, I'll put this one sort of up there. We're going to do this painting or one similar to it. And we'll just do a wet and wet sky for this one. So in this one, I've got quite a messy sky actually now that I look at it. It's mostly ultramarine blue, but when we do our wet and wet sky, we'll add some cerulean blue, maybe a little ultramarine, and some Payne's Gray. And then in our ocean, here we've got more of that turquoise, so we're going to be doing that. We've got some Payne's gray, our ultramarine blue here. And then we've got a little bit of a sandy beach with some grass. So we're going to start with our sky, and we're going to add our ocean and our sand, and then we're going to come back. We might have to let it dry a little bit and add some, there's some little islands or something here. I don't know. I made it up. So they're little pieces of land or islands or some rocks, because you could do them in Payne's gray too. And actually, now that I'm talking through that, since we're going to do a wet and wet sky for this one, let's start with our ocean this time so we can get the base of it dry. Then we'll work on our sky. And while this is drying, we'll do that. And then by the time we're done with our sky, we can come back in here and add our details. So for this one, the horizon line is sort of right in the middle. Now you can make yours wherever you want, but right in the middle would be 2 inches up from the bottom. So you can either measure that if you want, or you can just eyeball it, or use another piece of paper as a straight edge. I'm just going to use my regular pencil. Again, you could use a watercolor pencil. So, whoops, bring that back. Drawing our horizon line. And then I'm going to just mix a little bit more of this turquoise color. So that one is the cerulean blue and sap green. Now, like I said, just experiment with this. You might have different colors in your palette than I do. I have a very limited palette here. Just play around with it to see what, different shades of blue. Oh, I just put the wrong color in there. I was talking and not paying attention. So I've got some ultramarine blue in this one too. That's okay. So I'm going to add a little bit of sap green to that. But you might have something like Viridian in your palette. That's a nice blue-green. You could actually use that, in your ocean without having to mix a blue-green. So I've got a nice, maybe a little bit more blue. Looks a little bit too green. And the cerulean blue is sort of a more opaque color, which means less of the paper is going to show through. So if you do have Viridian, that would be a more transparent color. All right, I think that's going to work. Okay, so I'm going to do the same process as we did on this painting, where I'm going to start with the horizon line. And again, I'm sort of holding my brush parallel to the paper. I'm going to point my brush towards the horizon line, and I'm just going to drag the brush from one side of the paper to the other. And again, the only real line I'm worried about here is that horizon line. We're doing wet on dry here. And I like to go from one side to the other. That might take you a couple brush strokes here, but I want the bottom of that to be nice and uneven like that. And my horizon line is not perfect, and that's okay. Now in this painting, I have some definite separation of colors. So I'm going to sort of paint a band of this more turquoise color, and then I'm going to paint a band of this more ultramarine. So I'm going to kind of do another brush stroke here where, and you might have more success if you turn your paper to the side a little bit, and I'm going to actually point my brush the other way. This is still that turquoise color, and I'm just dragging my brush along here. So I'm creating the line down here instead. And I'm going to start from the other side and do the same thing. And I'm leaving that white space in the middle. So already we've created some really, really nice waves right here. If you didn't get yours completely even like I didn't, you can sort of even it out a little bit. It's a little bit thicker than the example, but that's okay. So I'm going to do the same thing with my ultramarine blue, and I've got some already mixed up here with some water. Just going to add a little bit more water to that. And then I'm just going to do the same thing I did up above. I'm pointing my brush towards that turquoise color and dragging my brush along the paper from one side to the other. And this is the ultramarine blue. You could use cerulean if you wanted. Really, it's up to you. I kind of like the ultramarine blue for this. You could even add some of the purple if you wanted. I think I'm just going to stick to the blues and greens. This one. Now I think this is a little bit light, so I'm just going to add a couple more brush strokes, and I'm just using the side of my brush here, and I'm just sort of glazing over what I just did and letting the brush sort of skip over the paper a little bit. And I'm going to do the same thing I did up here. And point my brush the other way too. I'm just sort of pulling my whole arm across the paper. We'll define this a little bit more, so don't be worried if it looks funny right now. Now I'm going to paint my sand, and then I'm going to fill in, I think, this blue here, because I want to define my beach a little bit. So I'm going to take a little bit of my burnt sienna. I'm going to water it down quite a bit. You could even add a little bit of yellow. I'm adding just a tiny bit of yellow just to brighten it up a little bit. Then I'm going to test this on my test paper. That looks pretty good. Now in this example, I kind of have the beach starting up here and kind of working its way down. So I'm just going to take, and I'm taking the side of my brush again, just like I did up in this area. And I'm going to kind of just drag my brush down diagonally. I'm just going to fill in that area. And if you have some white space, that's totally fine. I didn't like completely fill this in. And then I'm going to turn my paper. I'm going to take some of my ultramarine blue and I'm going to fill in this area in between. And I'm going to try to not touch that sand. Leaving a little white space there. And we're just sort of filling in that space with our paintbrush. Mm-hmm. So it's really the same color as that. We're going to do a little bit more glazing here with some other colors, but yeah. So we'll take another minute on that, and then we're going to do our wet and wet sky. Everybody doing okay with that? All right. So I'm going to move on to the sky. So we're going to do the same thing we did at the beginning of the first painting. And we're going to take our paintbrush with water from our water container, which might be slightly blue at this point. And we're just going to paint that whole sky. By now, this should be pretty dry for you. So you shouldn't have to worry too much about those bleeding into one another. We're just going to get as close as we can without touching that paint. And again, I'm just like smoothing that water around. I want it to be really glistening like this, but not too puddled or anything and not too dry. So I don't want it to look like the paint or the paper is absorbing the water yet. Nice and wet. I'm just adding a little bit more. And then we're gonna quickly go back to our cerulean blue here. I'm mixing it with a little water. And I'm just gonna start the top. Now I can see that this is already like kind of starting to dry in the corners. I'm gonna add a little bit more water here. But I'm just going to start at the top and kind of work my way in from the edges. And that's blending nicely. Add some watercolor. You can sort of wash your brush and smooth that around a little bit if you want. I just blotted mine a little bit. And then I'm going to add a little bit of Payne's Gray. Maybe that's too much. Just sort of in the corners and sort of smooth that around while that paint is still nice and wet. So I'm just sort of smoothing this around. Now, if you're really brave, you can make sure your horizon line is wet. I'm adding a little bit more water. And you can add a little bit of Payne's Gray down here. Just towards the horizon. I'm not going to go all the way to the center. I'm sort of starting from each side and working my way in here. And that's actually really nice. See, this is kind of really all you need. Now, you could add a little bit of the purple if you wanted to. I don't think it really needs it, but you could. Just add a little bit of purple here and there. And then just let that be. Just let it blend in together. So that's another thing to experiment with. Just wet and wet skies. How's everybody doing with that? Oh, good. And now you're going to be looking at clouds in a different way. Oh, okay. Yeah. That sounds awful. Oh, wow. Oh. No. That's funny. Oh, no. Okay, I'm going to move on here. Now, we are going to be painting up here close to the horizon, so just be mindful if your sky is still wet. I'm going to come up here with a little bit more of this turquoise and just do a little bit more glazing. So same process we used before, pointing our brush towards the horizon, just sort of dragging it along there. So we're just darkening the ocean just a little bit. I'm going to come in with a little bit of Payne's Gray while that's still wet. I'm just going to darken that horizon line a little bit. Now you can make it as dark or not dark as you like. Again, I'm just sort of like moving the brush over the paper and leaving that white space. Now again, you could pick out some areas here where you want to just define these waves just a little bit more. You could make that horizon line a little bit darker. That Payne's gray. Add some brush strokes just coming in from the sides there. That's looking pretty good. Now I'm going to start to add these little islands here. I'm going to do that first with the Payne's gray. I'm just going to add one here, and you can put them wherever you want. It might be a little easier to go point your brush down. So I'm going to put one there. Need a little more Payne's gray here. I just like to pull the Payne's gray out into my mixing area so I don't get it too dark. I like to mix it with a little bit of water. So I'm going to add one right here. So I'm just going to pull my brush along there. And then maybe one down here. So it's just going to look like a blob at this point. Maybe one right here. And then I'm going to add some burnt sienna. So I'm just sort of using the tip of my brush, defining that a little bit more. The burnt sienna. So nothing fancy, just kind of like a nice uneven line. Just painting right over that Payne's gray. You could soften it a bit at the top like that if you wanted to. Just sort of using the side of my brush to do that. But I think that I'm just going to leave them like that. I'm just adding a little bit more of it right here, just to darken it a little tiny bit more. If yours looks like dark enough already, mine seemed a little bit light. And then the last thing we have here is our grass. So I've got a mixture of some burnt sienna and some, I think I mixed the sap green with a little bit of burnt sienna. But you could just use straight on, actually I'm just going to use straight on sap green for that. I'm going to start with the green. So I've got some over here. Now if you have a smaller brush, you could use it. I'm just going to use this brush. I'm going to use the very tip of my brush. And all I'm doing is I'm starting at the bottom edge of my paper, and I'm just going to pull the brush up quickly, and I'm just using the tip of my brush, and so I'm like kind of barely pushing down. So just using the tip of my brush, and I'm just quickly pulling up those brush strokes. Now, if you don't feel comfortable doing it that way, you want to use a smaller brush, you can use a smaller brush, and you can take your time just drawing some nice little curved lines like that. And we can kind of make the grass in bunches here. We've got some little bunches of grass rather than it is your best or it isn't your best? Oh. Oh, good. Nice. So I'm kind of making these over here a little bit taller and a little bit shorter as they get towards this side of the painting. And then I'm just going to add a little bit of grass using burnt sienna. Just going to pull some of that into my mixing area here. Now, if you want it to be a little bit darker brown, we could add just a touch of ultramarine blue, just a little touch. So I'm just touching my brush in the ultramarine blue and then mixing it with this burnt sienna. So that makes it a little bit darker brown, which is kind of nice. So burnt sienna and ultramarine blue there. And then I'm just going to come back over here and I'm going to overlap some of those blades of grass with this darker brown, just to give it a little bit of dimension. So you can either do this technique, where you're just kind of pulling up quickly with the tip of your brush, or you can take your small brush and if you like to take your time with it. Either way works. They're just little curved lines. Now I got this one looking, some days my paintings come out a little bit too perfect. Like I've got the grass like perfectly spaced here and I don't like that. But that's just what kind of day it is. You just have to go with it. Now, if you wanted to sort of blend this in, I've kind of got some of the grass a little bit blended. You can come back here with your brush and sort of just wash your brush, get some water on your brush and sort of, you know, blend, soften that a little bit in some areas so that it doesn't, so it looks a little bit softer. Totally up to you. I'm just going to soften that a little bit. And that is it for that one. It's kind of nice to have the two different sky examples. So Jen, how did you feel about that sky? Good. How about everybody else? How's it going? Everyone's very quiet. You like your clouds? Is that what you said, Sinden? Oh, good. Yeah, it's a nice soft sky. Good. All right, what questions does anyone have? Yes, that's what I do. So like I like to kind of pick out some areas. So, I'd probably fiddle around with this one a little bit more. And for example, I just kind of look to see where I have these white spaces. And then in this area here, I've got the ultramarine blue. Maybe bring a little bit of that in. And, just sort of turn my paper so that the brush is pointing towards that. And then just sort of try to build up that definition. I like to start kind of light, but I could add a little bit darker here. So just on the top of those waves, just sort of kind of like we did with the clouds, just like glaze over the top where you have that nice white space and soften it off a little bit. But just pick out some areas, and you can even make them up if you want. It doesn't have to be, like if I wanted a wave down here, but there's no white space, well, I can just make it up. I can define an area like this and just keep making that a little bit darker and a little bit darker. And then, eventually you get that definition there where now it looks like we've got a little wave there. Yeah, I think, for this type of painting where it's a little bit more abstract, the key is definitely if you can leave that white space on your paper. And then, I kind of like to come back in here with some more brush strokes like this. And just, glaze those brush strokes over what you have there and keep sort of defining it a little bit more and a little bit more. Just play around with it. It takes a little bit of playing around to get what you want and what the look that you want, I think. All right. Well, we went over a little bit on time. I apologize. Well, I am going to get ready to close the class. I'm going to switch my camera back. And thank you all for being here today. This was really fun. I hope you have had fun, and I hope that this will inspire you to paint more seascapes and clouds. Okay, we'll see you next week, and I will send the instructions and the video sometime today. And if you do watch the video, let me know if the quality was better than they have been. I would really love to get that feedback so I can keep trying to improve it. All right. Thanks, everyone. All right. Bye.